Welcome to today's class on 10.2. In recap, the main functions of our kidneys happens with the nephrons. Waste product is collected by the tubules through the filtration from blood, producing urine. Let's go more in depth about the main functions that produce urine. There are 4 critical processes that lead to the formation of urine, and these processes are happening in millions of nephrons at the same time. Part 1. Glomerular filtration moves water and solutes, except proteins, from the blood plasma into the nephron. Remember that the filtered fluid is now called a filtrate. This is the kickoff to producing urine. Filtration is caused by the porous capillaries of the glomerulus. An example is if you think of it as a cheesecloth. You place the cheese mixture inside the cheesecloth, and only the water and small particles make it through the very small and minute pores. Similar to our cheesecloth, these pores are large enough to only allow water and most dissolved substances into the blood plasma to pass through the capillaries and into the Bowman's capsule. They prevent the proteins and blood cells from entering. This is the Bowman's capsule. With all that's happening in a small place, the blood pressure can be very high within the glomerulus, in fact around 4 times greater than the rest of the body. This high pressure promotes filtration even more. Relating it back to our cheesecloth, when someone twists and squeezes as much water as possible. With this process constantly happening all day, every day, a whopping 2,000 liters of blood will pass through the kidney, resulting in 160 liters of filtrate. This is clearly way too much water that's being wasted, and so it needs to be filtered even more. Part 2. Tubular respiration. This section. Tubular respiration removes useful substances such as sodium from the filtrate and returns them into the blood to be reused by bodily systems. The first section of the tubule is the proximal tubule, where most useful substances are reabsorbed and returned into the body. The process of reabsorption involves 1. Active transport, which is the movement of ions to an area of high concentration or against the flow. It also involves passive transport, which is the movement of ions to an area of low concentration. And it also involves osmosis, which is the movement of water from an area of high to low concentration. The cells of the proximal tube contain many mitochondria. The proximal tube uses the mitochondria, which use the energy-releasing power of ATP, to drive the active transport of sodium ions, glucose, and other solutes back into the blood. Passive transport is shown when the negative ions tag along to the electrical charge released, and osmosis moves the water from the filtrate into the blood. Small sidetrack. So you may be wondering, what's so special about the loop of Henle? The specificity of this part is crazy. There are 3 sub-processes to this section. As the descending limb of the loop of Henle reaches further down into the renal medulla of the kidney, this specific region happens to have a higher salt concentration. Part 1 of 3 is that the descending loop is thinner and permeable to water and ions. Because this section is saltier, osmosis occurs, pulling out more water from the filtrate and into the bloodstream. In turn, this makes the sodium ion concentration much higher in the filtrate. Part 2 of 3 involves the bend in the loop of Henle, which is only permeable to solutes or ions. So due to the high concentration of sodium ions, they are forced out through active transport. Finally, Part 3 involves the thick end of the loop, where the active transport of sodium ions continues to take place, along with the passive transport of other ions. The movement of sodium ions into the blood helps replenish the salt content of the area surrounding the loop, and makes the filter less concentrated than the surrounding tissue before it returns back to the renal cortex. Part 3. Tubular secretion moves additional waste and excess substances from the blood into the filtrate. This section is more of our control unit, and processes depend on the needs and activities of the body. Potassium ions are secreted into the 3rd section named the distal tube to balance the charge. Hydrogen ions are secreted in to maintain the pH of blood, and other medications that weren't originally part of the body are secreted into the tubule. Part 4. Water reabsorption. Water reabsorption removes water from the filtrate and returns it into the blood to be reused by bodily systems. At this point, there is still a fair amount of useful water in the filtrate. Since the collecting duct travels back through the renal medulla, This means that it travels back through the salty region filled with sodium ions left in from one of the previous steps. This allows for osmosis to reabsorb the large amounts of water out of the filtrate and return it back to the body. When someone is dehydrated, the distal tube allows for more absorption of water from the filtrate, which would make the urine more discolored. To conclude, the reabsorption of water in the collecting duct causes the filtrate to become about 4 times as concentrated by the time it exits the duct. That's all for today. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. The specificity. Is that even a word? Glomerular. Glomerular filter. Part 3 involves the ascending part of the sodium ions continues to take